The Reclaimer's fleet drifted silently through the darkened void, a handful of human ships among the stars that once gleamed with the promise of a thriving galaxy. Now, they were reduced to this, a small, tattered fleet of survivors on the fringes of a galaxy ruled by the Zereth, an alien species whose invasion had ravaged humanity's colonies. Earth itself lay in ruins, the cradle of humanity's birth now a barren, lifeless rock, its cities turned to dust and its skies burned with the ashes of a lost civilization. Captain Lyra Valen stood on the bridge of the Aegis, the fleet's flagship, staring out at the cold, empty expanse ahead. Her dark eyes were sharp, alert, always scanning for threats, always ready for whatever came next. She had been through too much to allow the pain of their losses to distract her. Lyra was the Reclaimer's leader by necessity, not desire. She had once been a fleet commander in the war against the Zereth, but now her role was different. There was no more organized military, no more grand fleets. It was just them, a handful of survivors scraping together what little they had left, each day a fight to stay alive. The crew was scattered, their numbers dwindling. Once, humanity's influence had stretched across hundreds of star systems. Now they were lucky if they could hold onto a single colony, let alone retake a system from the invaders. Captain came the voice of her communications officer, a young woman named Imani. She was the only one on board who had the courage to speak the truth to Lyra without hesitation. "We've picked up something unusual. A signal, weak, but it matches human technology." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. It could be a trap, but the possibility was too great to ignore. "Where?" she asked, her voice cold but steady. "Planet Core," Imani replied, her fingers flying over the console. "It's on the far edge of the sector, well beyond any of our usual routes. It's a long shot, but I think it's worth investigating." Lyra thought for a moment. Core had been a forgotten colony, left to rot after the initial wave of the Zarth invasion. She had assumed it was lost to the invaders, another casualty in their merciless campaign. But the signal, it was human. Her mind raced. What if there was something left on Core, a hidden treasure trove of old tech, or perhaps survivors, those who had managed to survive without the rest of humanity knowing? "We're going," Lyra said firmly. "Prepare the fleet. We'll head out at once. If it's a trap, we'll deal with it. If it's not, it could be the key to turning this war around." The bridge hummed with the sound of orders being given, engines coming to life. Lyra watched her crew go to work, each of them driven by the same flicker of hope that burned within her. For a moment, the bleakness of the galaxy seemed to lift. This was their chance, the first real lead in years. Humanity had been shattered, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could be rebuilt. As the Aegis broke through the edge of the system, leaving behind the remains of the known galaxy, Lyra felt the weight of their mission. The Reclaimers weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for something greater, for the chance to reclaim their place among the stars. And that was something worth risking everything for. The fleet moved swiftly through the void, its engines humming with purpose as it approached the coordinates of the signal. Lyra stood at the front of the Aegis bridge, her fingers lightly resting on the control panel as her thoughts raced. Core was a world long forgotten by most, a dark spot on the galaxy's map, and now it was a beacon of hope, or perhaps a deadly trap. She could almost feel the weight of her crew's collective anticipation pressing down on her shoulders. They were all waiting for something, anything, to give them a reason to keep fighting. Imani's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're entering Core's orbit, Captain. The signal is stronger now. It's coming from the planet's surface, centered on a large, abandoned city complex. It matches the architecture of a pre-war human colony." Lyra's heart quickened. The prospect of finding something left behind, something useful, was rare in the galaxy now. But it wasn't just the potential for technology that had her on edge. It was the possibility that there were survivors, people who might have endured the horrors of the Zarth invasion, and were now waiting for a chance to rejoin humanity's fight. If such people still existed, they could be the spark needed to reignite the resistance. Any sign of Xarth activity? Lyra asked, her voice sharp. Imani's fingers danced over the console. No, Captain, no Xarth ships in the vicinity, but there's something else. Strange readings on the planet's surface. It's like there's an energy signature of some kind, but it's erratic. Lyra didn't like the sound of that. The Xarth had their own means of detecting human ships, even in the deepest reaches of space. If they had left a monitoring device behind, it could be a trap waiting to spring. Still, she couldn't afford to back away now. This was their best lead in years. Deploy the landing teams, Lyra ordered. Keep the comms open and monitor for any unexpected changes. We're going down there, no matter what. The Aegis began to descend into Kor's atmosphere, the planet's surface appearing before them like a forgotten wasteland, scared by the ravages of war. The city complex that the signal had come from was large, a sprawling metropolis with dark, towering structures that once housed millions. Now it was eerily silent, the crumbling buildings standing like tombstones in a forgotten graveyard. As the landing shuttle descended toward the ruins, Lyra's mind raced with possibilities. What had happened to this place? Why had it been abandoned, and why had the signal just now reactivated? She knew better than to think they had stumbled upon a random remnant of the past. The Reclaimers were not the only ones who had once occupied these cities. The question was, who else was still here? The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, its landing gear sinking slightly into the thick dust of the planet's surface. The crew quickly disembarked, weapons drawn and eyes scheming for movement. Lyra led the way, her boots crunching softly against the desolate ground, her every step careful, measured. They were walking into the unknown, where every shadow could hide a threat, where every corner could reveal something that would change everything. Keep your guard up, Lyra said, her voice low but firm. This place may be abandoned, but it doesn't mean we're alone. The silence of the world around them pressed in as they moved toward the source of the signal. The city sprawled endlessly before them, a labyrinth of ruins. But the signal, it was getting clearer, stronger, like an unrelenting call from the past. Then, just as they reached the heart of the city, something moved, a faint glimmer of light in the distance. It was far away, barely noticeable, but enough to catch Lyra's attention. Stay alert, she whispered, signaling her crew to hold position. Something's here. As they advanced cautiously, the light grew brighter, revealing an ancient structure buried beneath the ruins. It was unlike anything Lyra had seen before, more advanced than any human technology she knew, with strange markings carved into the metal that seemed to pulse with energy. The signal was coming from within. Lyra's pulse quickened. This was it, the relic, and yet something about it felt wrong. Her instincts screamed at her to be cautious, but there was no turning back now. Humanity's future, and perhaps their survival, lay behind those walls. The team moved through the ruins with heightened caution, every step echoed by the haunting silence of Kor's abandoned city. The glowing structure at the center of the ruins loomed larger with each step, its smooth, metallic surface contrasting sharply with the jagged, broken buildings that surrounded it. It was clear that this place had been untouched for centuries, yet this structure, this enigma, seemed to have been preserved, almost deliberately hidden from the world. Lyra's thoughts churned as they approached. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. Could this be the key to humanity's future? Was this relic the weapon they had longed for, or was it something else, something darker? The team set up a perimeter around the structure, securing the area before advancing further. Lyra felt the tension in the air, the same kind of nervous energy that always surrounded her before a big decision. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, though there was no one else in sight. Captain, Imani called from the front, her voice tense. There's a console here. It's active. Lyra stepped forward, her boots crunching against the dry earth as she approached the glowing interface. The console was strange, nothing like the technology they had known, with swirling symbols and patterns that seemed to shimmer on the surface as if alive. It was a marvel of design, but also an enigma. Her hand hovered over the console, unsure whether to touch it. Every instinct screamed at her to be careful, but the possibility of unlocking something vital for humanity's survival pushed her forward. "Are you sure it's safe?" Jace, who had recovered enough to join the expedition, asked quietly. He was still recovering from his injuries, but his sharp gaze never wavered. Imani didn't respond immediately. Her fingers traced the symbols, studying the interface carefully. "It's not like any tech I've seen before, but it's responding to my touch. Almost as if it's scanning me." Lyra held her breath. The last thing they needed was a trap, but the allure of discovery was too strong. She nodded. "Proceed with caution. But if this is the weapon we've been searching for, then we need to understand it." Imani's fingers tapped the console in a specific pattern. There was a low hum as the structure around them seemed to react, lights flickering to life and the ground beneath their feet trembling slightly. The symbols on the console rearranged themselves, forming new patterns as if the structure itself were coming to life. Then the voice spoke. It was cold, mechanical, yet undeniably human. "Authorization required. Identify." Lyra stiffened. She had never expected something like this. The voice wasn't alien. It was human. But whose voice was it? And why was it asking for identification? Was this a remnant of the old human colonies, something left behind by those who had been destroyed in the war? Imani glanced at Lyra, confusion in her eyes. "It's asking for identification. What do we do?" Lyra thought quickly. "Give it my name. Tell it I'm Captain Lyra Vallon of the Reclaimers." Imani hesitated but complied. "I am Captain Lyra Vallon of the Reclaimers, leader of the surviving human forces." The structure hummed again, the voice on the other end silent for a long moment. Then it spoke again, but this time with a strange tone, almost as if it recognized the name. "Captain Lyra Vallon, welcome," the voice intoned. "The last human who activated this system was lost. The Reclaimers, they were not expected. You are not alone." A chill ran down Lyra's spine. The word struck her like a physical blow. Not alone could mean anything. She turned to the team, her mind racing. What does it mean? Who is this? What's going on here? Before anyone could respond, a new sound filled the air, footsteps. The unmistakable sound of boots crunching against the dry, cracked ground. Lyra spun toward the sound, hand instinctively reaching for her weapon, but her breath caught in her throat. Figures emerged from the shadows of the city ruins. Humans, dressed in tattered old military uniforms, their faces grim and hollow-eyed. They moved with a quiet precision, and it was clear they were no ordinary survivors. These were soldiers, perhaps the last of the human military, lost to time and war. Lyra's heart pounded. These were not refugees or civilians. These were warriors, hardened by years of survival in the wastelands of a destroyed galaxy, and they had been waiting. The leader of the group stepped forward, his eyes locked on Lyra. "I am Captain Elias Kane," he said, his voice hoarse. "And we've been waiting for you, Captain Vallon." Lyra's eyes narrowed as Captain Elias Kane stepped forward, his gaze never wavering from hers. He had the bearing of a man who had seen too much war, too many betrayals, and yet still had the strength to stand. His face was marked by the harsh realities of survival, deep lines carved into his skin, and a look of haunted determination in his eyes. "We've been watching you," Kane said, his voice low but steady. "You and your crew, the Reclaimers. It's been a long time since humanity had a reason to hope." Lyra didn't lower her guard. Something about the way Kane spoke unsettled her. "Why didn't you make contact earlier?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "You've been here all this time. Why wait until now?" Kane glanced behind him, where his soldiers remained in formation, their expressions as unreadable as stone. "We didn't know if we could trust you. The war, it's changed us all. But now we've seen what you're capable of. You found us, after all. That says something." Imani shifted uncomfortably beside Lyra, her eyes scanning the soldiers. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and caution. "What is this place, and why haven't we heard of you?" Kane hesitated for a moment, as though deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. "We're the last remnants of the Earth Defense Forces. After the Jareth destroyed the fleet, we went into hiding. This city, it's one of the last human strongholds, a relic from before the war. We've been keeping watch over the galaxy, tracking the Jareth's movements. But more importantly, we've been waiting for humanity to find its way back." Lyra's mind raced. The Earth Defense Forces had been humanity's strongest military arm during the war. They had disappeared without a trace after the Jareth's brutal onslaught, their fate a mystery that had plagued the survivors. And now they were standing before her, survivors in their own right, ready to ally with the Reclaimers. "And you've been waiting for us?" Lyra asked, trying to make sense of the situation. "Why?" "Because you're not just survivors," Kane replied. "You're the first real hope we've had in years. The Jareth have been carving through the galaxy, expanding their empire. We've seen what they're capable of, but we've also seen what they fear, the human spirit. It's still out there in you, in your crew. We knew it wouldn't take much to light the fire again." Lyra's pulse quickened at the implication. If the Earth Defense Forces were still out there, still monitoring the Jareth, they could provide the firepower and intelligence the Reclaimers needed to make a real difference. This was the ally they had desperately sought, an ally who had waited for the right moment to act. "Where's the technology you mentioned?" Lyra asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "The one that could help us fight back?" Kane's face darkened. "It's not here, at least not entirely. There's an ancient military complex on the far side of the planet. The Jareth didn't find it when they first invaded, no one knows why, but it holds what we need. The last of humanity's weapons, its tech, its knowledge." Lyra felt a flicker of excitement. If they could reach that complex, humanity might stand a chance after all. But the sense of dread she had felt earlier was returning. Something about this didn't sit right. "And why hasn't anyone gone to get it?" Lyra asked, her tone sharp. "If you knew about it, why leave it behind?" Kane's jaw tightened, and he turned away for a moment, as though considering how much of the past to reveal. "Because," he said, turning back to face her, "the complex is not what it seems. There's something inside, something we're not sure we can control." Imani spoke up. "What do you mean? Is it some kind of weapon?" Kane looked at her with weary eyes. "Worse, it's a weapon that could end the war, yes, but it's also a weapon that could destroy everything we've worked for. The Jareth fear it, and we don't know what it will do if we activate it." Lyra's mind was racing now. A weapon of unimaginable power, capable of shifting the balance of the entire war, but at what cost? The uncertainty gnawed at her. What kind of weapon could have that kind of potential? "I'll go," Lyra said, her voice firm. "We need to know what we're up against. We need to make sure this weapon doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Kane's eyes darkened. "You don't know what you're asking, Captain. It's a dangerous place. No one who's gone in has ever come back." "I don't care," Lyra replied. "We don't have the luxury of fear anymore. We need to take that chance." As she spoke, a chill ran down her spine. She didn't just fear the Jareth or the threat of the weapon. She feared what the weapon might reveal about humanity's true nature, and whether the cost of using it would be more than they could bear. The journey to the military complex was anything but smooth. Lyra and her crew, now allied with Captain Kane's group of hardened soldiers, moved swiftly through the ruins, avoiding the perimeter of a city that had once been full of life but was now reduced to rubble. The path to the complex was treacherous, through vast stretches of abandoned farmland and overgrown terrain, hidden from the eyes of any potential Xarth patrols. Imani kept her eyes on the readouts as they advanced. "We're nearing the location," she said, her voice taut with tension. "The readings are still fluctuating, but there's a massive energy source deep beneath the surface. It's strange, almost like it's hiding itself." Kane, who had been leading the way, stopped at the edge of a cliff overlooking a wide valley. In the distance, the jagged silhouette of a massive structure could be seen, half buried in the mountainside. It looked ancient, its architecture unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. The dark metal and stone were covered in vines and debris, as though nature itself had tried to reclaim it. Yet the hum of power that emanated from it felt undeniably alive. "This is it," Kane said, his tone grim. "The black site. The Xarth never found it, but that doesn't mean they haven't been looking. We can't waste any more time. Once we're in, we need to move quickly." Lyra nodded. She had already prepared herself for what lay ahead, but there was still an unease that gnawed at her. The idea of a weapon capable of ending the war, or possibly destroying everything, was a terrifying prospect. But if humanity had any chance at survival, they had to face this unknown head-on. The group began the descent toward the entrance, a massive steel door hidden in the side of the mountain, almost as if it had been intentionally concealed. As they approached, the door slid open with a loud, grinding sound, as though the ancient mechanisms had been disturbed after centuries of silence. Inside, the air was cold and stale, the faint smell of decay hanging in the atmosphere. The walls were lined with strange, alien markings, symbols Lyra couldn't decipher. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their footsteps as they moved deeper into the complex. The flickering lights ahead illuminated a hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. "We're close," Kane muttered, his hand on his weapon, eyes scanning the darkness. "This place is full of traps. Be ready for anything." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. The further they went, the more she felt the weight of their mission. They weren't just seeking a weapon. They were walking into the heart of an unknown nightmare, one that could alter the course of humanity's future or destroy it completely. The hallway opened into a vast chamber, a cavernous room filled with towering machines and ancient consoles. In the center of the room stood a large pedestal, atop which rested a sleek, crystalline object, pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly light. "That's it," Kane said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The heart of the complex. It's what we've been guarding all these years, the weapon the Xarth fear." Lyra stepped forward, but something in the air felt wrong. The closer she got to the pedestal, the more the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She could almost hear a whisper, faint but unmistakable in her mind. The voice was fragmented, disjointed, as if it were speaking through a haze. "Do not touch it." She froze mid-step, her instincts screaming at her to stop. She turned toward Kane, but he seemed just as tense, his eyes narrowed as though he, too, had felt something. "What was that?" Lyra asked, her voice low but urgent. Kane's face darkened. "The heart doesn't just hold power. It holds something else, too, something no one expected. It's a weapon, yes, but it's also a prison. And whoever dares to unleash it might unleash something else entirely." Imani looked at Lyra, her brow furrowed in confusion. "A prison? For what?" Kane took a deep breath. The Xarth were afraid of what humanity was capable of, but they feared something else, what we could become if we had the power to defend ourselves. The heart was designed to control that power, to keep it from getting out of hand. It's not just a weapon. It's a tool to control the very essence of human strength. And once activated, it could either bring salvation or total destruction. A shiver ran down Lyra's spine as she stared at the crystalline object. She had expected danger, but not this, a weapon that could either save humanity or erase it from existence. The weight of the decision was crushing. To use it was to gamble with everything they had fought for, and to leave it dormant was to risk being wiped out by the Xarth. What do we do? Imani asked, her voice trembling. Lyra's eyes locked onto the heart of the complex. Every instinct pulled her to turn back, to walk away from the power that lay before her. But the war raged on, and the stakes had never been higher. Only one way to find out, Lyra said, her voice unwavering. We activate it, and we face whatever comes next. As she stepped toward the pedestal, she knew there was no turning back. Lyra's hand hovered over the heart of the complex. The crystalline object pulsed in the dim light, its energy radiating through the room like a beacon calling her to act. Every instinct in her told her to stop, to turn around and walk away, but she knew better. This was the moment they had fought for, the moment they had traveled across an entire war-torn galaxy for. The key to humanity's survival, or its annihilation, was right in front of her. Imani stood at her side, her face pale, eyes wide with fear and awe. Are you sure about this, Captain? We have no idea what's going to happen. Lyra turned to her, her own fear mirrored in Imani's eyes. I'm not sure of anything anymore, but we don't have a choice. The Xerath won't stop until they've wiped us out. If this thing can help us fight back, then we have to try. The room felt colder now, the silence growing heavier with each passing second. Kane, standing slightly behind them, clenched his jaw. He had warned them about the dangers of activating the heart, but it was clear to him that Lyra was resolved. His eyes flicked toward the glowing pedestal, then to the soldiers, who stood motionless, weapons at the ready. There was no turning back. Lyra finally made up her mind. She extended her hand, fingers brushing the surface of the heart. The moment her skin made contact, a violent surge of energy shot through her body, causing her to stumble back. Her heart raced as a flood of visions, sounds, and emotions bombarded her mind. The world around her seemed to dissolve into a whirlwind of images. The Earth before the war, the rise of the Xarth Empire, humanity's brutal collapse, and the endless bloodshed. She saw the destruction, the suffering, the screams. But then there was something else, something that twisted her stomach into knots. An image of a human face, unfamiliar yet hauntingly familiar, staring back at her through the chaos. Captain, Imani shouted, grabbing Lyra's arm to steady her. Lyra gasped, her breath shallow as the visions faded, replaced by a steady hum vibrating in the air. The pedestal had shifted, its surface rippling like water, and in its place was a holographic display, flickering with data streams and alien symbols. Her vision blurred as she tried to focus on the information scrolling before her eyes. It was as though the heart was showing her its true purpose, its origins, its power. Kane stepped forward, his voice urgent. What is it, Captain? What's happening? Lyra's hands trembled as she reached toward the hologram. It's alive, she whispered, her voice barely audible. This is what the Xerath were afraid of. It's not just a weapon. It's a key, a way to unlock human potential. Before she could finish, the ground beneath them began to rumble. The lights flickered violently, and the walls shook as if the entire complex were waking up from a long slumber. A deep, resonant sound vibrated through the air, a low growl that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. The door they had entered through slammed shut with a deafening crash, trapping them inside. Imani whipped around, her pulse quickening. What the hell is that? Lyra's stomach twisted. I don't know, she said, her voice thick with dread. But we've activated something powerful. Kane cursed under his breath, his eyes darting around the chamber. We need to leave. Now. But before anyone could move, the floor beneath their feet shifted. A series of metal panels slid open, revealing a narrow passage leading downward into a vast, dark chasm. From the depths, glowing eyes appeared, dozens of them, followed by a low growl that sent chills down Lyra's spine. These weren't just machines, they were alive, and they were coming for them. Captain, we can't stay here, Kane shouted, grabbing Lyra's arm. We need to get to the exit. Now. But Lyra couldn't tear her gaze away from the entrance to the chasm. Something about it felt familiar. The eyes staring back at her, those glowing, ominous eyes, struck a chord deep within her. She had seen them before. Somewhere, in the flashes of memory that had overwhelmed her when she touched the heart. Those eyes, human eyes, now twisted and corrupted by something dark. They're not just guarding the heart, Lyra murmured, almost to herself. They're connected to it. Before she could process her thoughts further, the chamber exploded into chaos. The creatures emerged from the shadows, half-human, half-machine hybrids, their bodies stitched together with alien technology. Their eyes gleamed with an unsettling intelligence, and their movements were eerily synchronized. They were like nothing Lyra had ever seen before. Kane grabbed his weapon and opened fire, but the creatures moved too quickly, their bodies evading the blasts with unnatural agility. Lyra's mind raced. These weren't just enemies. They were products of the heart, twisted creations born from the very power they had just unleashed. "We have to fight our way out," Lyra shouted, drawing her own weapon as she took a defensive stance. "We can't let them stop us now." The creatures charged, and the room descended into a blur of gunfire, flashing lights, and the relentless growls of the abominations they faced. Lyra's pulse surged, her senses sharpened by the adrenaline. She had to survive this. There was no choice now. This was the war they had fought for, and it would take everything they had to make it out alive. The air in the chamber crackled with energy as Lyra's team fought for their lives. The half-human, half-machine creatures surged forward, their bodies a grotesque mix of twisted flesh and advanced technology, their eyes glowing with a chilling, unnatural light. The hum of their energy shields and the staccato blasts of gunfire filled the room. Kane's voice was a bark of command as he and his soldiers formed a defensive perimeter, their weapons blazing. "Move, we need to get to the exit now." Lyra fired her weapon, each shot a calculated burst aimed at the creatures that relentlessly advanced on them. But it was no use. Their armor was too advanced, their movements too erratic. No matter how many they shot down, more seemed to emerge from the shadows, their numbers seemingly endless. Imani ducked behind a shattered pillar, breathing heavily. "Captain, what the hell are these things? They're not just guarding the heart, are they?" "No," Lyra panted, her mind racing. "They're part of it. The heart, it's more than just a weapon. It's alive. It created these things. It's using them to protect itself, to keep us from taking its power." Kane's face twisted with disgust. "Great. So we've activated a damned living weapon. Perfect timing." The creatures were closing in fast, their claws scraping against the floor as they advanced, their movements synchronized in a terrifying, machine-like precision. One of them lunged at Lyra, its jagged claws slashing the air. She barely managed to dodge, the creature's talons missing her by inches. She fired again, the blast catching it in the shoulder, but it barely slowed. "We need a plan," Imani shouted, her voice tight with panic as she fired at the oncoming swarm. Lyra's heart raced as her mind spun for a solution. There was no time to strategize, only survive. She turned to Kane. "You said the heart was a prison, a way to control power. Can we shut it down? Can we stop this?" Kane's face tightened. "It's not that simple. The heart's energy is intertwined with these creatures. There's no way to deactivate it without triggering something much worse. We either deal with them, or we die trying." Lyra's grip on her weapon tightened. She couldn't let it end like this. They had come so far, survived so much, only to be stopped by these abominations. No, not after everything. Suddenly, the walls of the chamber trembled as the ground shook violently. A loud, mechanical whine filled the air. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The heart's energy was escalating, building to something far more powerful than she had anticipated. The creatures seemed to sense it too, their movements growing more frantic. "What the hell is happening?" Imani gasped, her voice trembling. Lyra's eyes darted to the holographic display still flickering above the pedestal. It had changed. the data now streaming at a frantic pace, the symbols swirling faster than before. "It's feeding off the fight," Lyra said grimly. "Every time we kill one of them, the heart draws more power. We're feeding it, feeding the damn thing." Kane's eyes widened. "And when it reaches full power?" Lyra didn't want to think about it, but she had to. If they didn't stop this now, the heart would activate something catastrophic. The creature's the heart, it was all one massive trap, designed to ensure that only those strong enough to survive the trial could ever wield its power. But the cost? "We have to destroy the heart, or we're all dead," Lyra said, her voice steady, but the weight of the decision was crushing her. Destroying the heart would mean losing the weapon they had come for, the last hope of humanity. But if they didn't, they risked unleashing something far worse. Kane's eyes narrowed as he adjusted his weapon. "We can't let that happen. If you're right, then we have no choice. We take it down now." The creatures, sensing the rising energy, grew even more relentless. A wave of them crashed forward, forcing Lyra and her team to fall back into the deeper recesses of the chamber. The floor beneath them began to vibrate violently, and the air grew thick with static. As they retreated toward the far end of the room, Lyra felt a cold sense of finality settle in her stomach. The decision was made. The heart had to be destroyed, but doing so would cost them dearly. The creatures were not just defending the heart, they were part of it, and the more of them they killed, the more the heart would grow. "On my signal," Lyra said, voice steady despite the chaos, "we hit it with everything we have." The room erupted in violence as they made their final push. Lyra moved with the precision of a soldier, firing with deadly accuracy as Kane's team laid down cover fire. The creatures fought back savagely, but Lyra could see their defenses weakening, the heart's power growing unstable with every passing second. She charged toward the pedestal, heart pounding, weapon raised. The creatures roared in unison, swarming around her, but she pressed on. Her hand shot out, grasping the cold surface of the heart. A blinding flash of light erupted from the pedestal. The shockwave knocked Lyra to the ground, her body slamming into the cold metal floor. For a moment, everything went silent, as if the world itself had stopped. Then the walls began to crack. The creatures, their eyes now glazed and vacant, crumbled into dust, their forms disintegrating into particles that scattered into the air like ash. The heart's pulse slowed, its glowing light dimming as the room fell into darkness. Lyra pushed herself up, disoriented and bruised, but alive. The heart was gone. The creatures were gone. And for the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. Kane stumbled over to her, his face ashen. "Did we?" Lyra nodded slowly, breathless. "We did, but at what cost?" The room, now eerily quiet, was a testament to the devastation they had just witnessed. They had destroyed the heart, but they had also unleashed its true power. There was no turning back. The chamber was still, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and the remnants of the creatures that had once swarmed them. Lyra's breath came in short gasps as she slowly pushed herself to her feet, her hands shaking from the after effects of the explosive surge of energy that had erupted from the heart. Her body ached, but her mind was clear, too clear. They had done it. They had destroyed the heart, the weapon that had held the key to either saving or obliterating humanity. But now the aftermath loomed over them like a storm waiting to break. Kane crouched beside her, his eyes scanning the ruined room, his voice low. "It's over, Captain. The heart is destroyed. The creatures are gone, but we don't know what else we've unleashed." Lyra nodded, her mind racing. There was a hollow feeling inside her, a mix of relief and dread. The heart had been a prison, something that contained power humanity was never meant to wield. But with its destruction, they had severed the chain that had bound humanity to a dangerous future. At least, that was what she hoped. Imani stumbled to her side, her face pale, but her eyes burning with determination. "Did we do the right thing?" We've lost the weapon, and now? What? The war's not over. Lyra looked at her crew, her heart heavy. We've lost a weapon, yes, but we've also destroyed something that could have turned us into monsters. The Xerath would have used it too, and they would have used it to make us like them, nothing more than pawns in a war for power. We couldn't let that happen. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. Kane immediately raised his weapon, but Lyra held up a hand. It wasn't Xarth soldiers. The door to the chamber slid open with a slow grinding sound, and in stepped the remaining members of their ragtag team, soldiers, engineers, survivors from various factions, all of them tired but alive. They had made it through, against all odds. "Captain," one of the soldiers said, breathing heavily, "we're receiving transmissions from the fleet. They're requesting a status update. They think we've activated the heart, but the systems are scrambled. What do we tell them?" Lyra stood tall, her posture firm, despite the exhaustion that weighed her down. "Tell them the truth. We found the heart. We destroyed it. And now we have to rebuild. The war is far from over, but humanity will fight. We always have." Imani stepped forward, her voice tinged with quiet resolve. "The Xerath won't stop just because we destroyed one weapon. They'll come for us with everything they've got. We need a new plan, something that doesn't rely on the heart." Lyra nodded. "We'll find a way. We fought too long and too hard to let them win now." Kane glanced over his shoulder, then back at Lyra. "And what about the rest of the heart's power? The part that was tied to us, the humans it was trying to control. If it's still out there, how do we know we've really severed it?" Lyra's gaze hardened, her resolve solidifying. "We can't know for sure. But what we can do is stop hiding behind old weapons and learn to fight with what we've got left. We've already come too far. We're stronger than they think." The survivors gathered around her, their eyes full of fear, but also a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. The future was uncertain, and there would be no easy path forward, but for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt like they were on the edge of something more than just survival. They were on the edge of humanity's rebirth. Outside, the sky was clear, and the distant stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if offering a promise that, despite everything, there was still hope. The Xerath would come again, of that she was certain. But now, humanity had tasted what it was truly capable of, and as long as they had the will to fight, they would reclaim the stars. Lyra looked at her team, her family, forged in the crucible of war, and spoke with the finality of someone who had seen the depths of despair and had chosen to rise above it. "We've taken the first step," she said. "Now we rebuild for humanity." And with that, they turned away from the broken complex, walking into the unknown future together. There was no more fear, no more hesitation. They were ready,